In the capital city of Zixtian, where towering crystal towers pierced the sky, the Zix people thrived. Their empire was a society built on strength, order, and loyalty, where mercy was seen as a weakness and compassion a flaw. The elite of Zixtian moved through the grand hall of the palace with quiet grace, their silver robes barely brushing the ground. Among them was Cern, one of the king's most respected guardians, a warrior who had fought in countless battles, his duty rooted deeply in protecting the Zix way of life. But today, something disrupted the polished perfection of the hall. Through the tall, iridescent doors, a small human child wandered inside, her presence like a faint, unsettling ripple across a still pond. She was no older than 7, her wide, curious eyes taking in the massive, alien architecture around her. Dust clung to her, a reminder of the destruction she had left behind on Earth. The child's name was Mira. She had been separated from her parents during a chaotic escape from Earth, and now she found herself in the Zix Palace, a place that did not welcome strangers, especially not vulnerable humans. The grand space, vast and foreign, seemed to swallow her tiny figure, making her all the more fragile. From his post near the throne, Cern's sharp gaze fell upon her. He was taken aback. Humans, to the Zix, were little more than a primitive race with fleeting lifespans, prone to emotional outbursts and lacking the discipline Zixtian revered. And yet, the child moved with quiet curiosity, unafraid of her strange surroundings. There was something in her small, gentle presence that struck Cern, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, one he could scarcely recognize. Against all instincts and without understanding why, he approached her, his towering form casting a long shadow over the small child. Mira looked up, her bright eyes meeting his. She seemed both innocent and bold, as if she understood something beyond words. Who are you?" Cern's deep, rumbling voice, though intimidating, softened as he addressed her. Mira tilted her head, as if she could sense he meant her no harm. "I'm Mira. I came from Earth." The simplicity of her words sent a murmur through the hall, for no human had spoken so openly within these walls. The assembled elite watched, their expressions unreadable, but they did not interrupt. There was something magnetic about the interaction unfolding between the warrior and the human child. "You are far from home," Cern remarked, his gaze searching her face for the strength that allowed such calm in a place like this. "This place is not for humans." Mira held his gaze, her expression unyielding. I don't have a home anymore, but you seem kind." The statement was unexpected, and Cern's grip on his spear loosened. Kindness was not a virtue celebrated among his people. He looked down, momentarily speechless. Something about her words felt strangely comforting, though he knew it was a dangerous feeling, a distraction from duty. In the background, King Zurak, the ruler of the Zix, observed this unlikely interaction from his throne. He was a wise and formidable leader, with centuries of experience governing a society that valued strength above all. His advisers stirred in discomfort, their disapproval whispered through clenched jaws, but Zurak silenced them with a single raised hand. There was something in this brief connection that caught his attention, a reminder, perhaps, of things beyond the rigid codes of Zix. The hall grew quiet as Cern knelt, surprising himself as much as those around him, lowering himself to Mira's level. "Do you need anything?" he asked, the words coming out slowly, unfamiliar on his tongue. Mira smiled, a gentle, unexpected gesture. "I just want to be safe." The simplicity of her request, the innocence within it, shook Cern to his core. The very notion of safety, one that he had taken for granted as a warrior of Zix, felt fragile and precious in this moment. He extended a hand. "You are safe here, Mira." Cern led Mira quietly through the palace halls, his mind troubled by his own actions. He had never shown an interest in outsiders, especially not in humans, a species most Zix saw as a burden. But with Mira, something was different. Her small hand clutching his larger one felt like a bridge he hadn't known he was missing. They reached a quiet terrace overlooking the sprawling Zixton city, with its silver spires and gleaming bridges arched high over the streets. Mira's eyes widened as she took in the view, the awe on her face softening the stark, alien landscape around them. Sun watched her, torn between his duty and an instinct he could not name. "Is this your home?" Mira asked, her voice full of wonder. Sun hesitated. "Yes, it is. Zixton is orderly, disciplined." His words sounded hollow even to himself, as if the pride he once felt had lost its meaning in Mira's presence. Orderly. Mira tilted her head, puzzled. We didn't have that on Earth anymore. Everyone was scared, always running." Her voice grew soft, a slight tremor betraying the bravery she had shown so far. He watched as Mira hugged her knees, staring into the distance. The idea of her running in fear, alone on a chaotic battlefield, made something stir in him, a quiet, burning anger. Yet, he kept his voice calm. "Not here. We do not run. We face whatever comes." Mira looked up at him with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years. "You're strong, but being strong doesn't mean not caring, does it?" The question pierced through San's carefully maintained armor. No one, especially not a human, had dared to ask him such a thing. Zixton taught that strength came from detachment, from prioritizing duty over emotion. But in this small girl's eyes, he saw a resilience born not of strength alone, but of something deeper. For the first time, he questioned if the Zix had overlooked an important part of true strength. Their quiet moment shattered as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor. Sun turned to see his superior, Commander Fricks, flanked by 2 palace guards. Frick's expression was cold and severe, his sharp gaze fixed on Mira. "Sun," Fricks began, voice thick with reprimand, "explain why you have brought this human to the inner terrace. This is a place reserved for our people, not for outsiders." Sun straightened, instinctively adopting his guard posture. "She is only a child, Commander. No harm will come from her being here." Fricks's face darkened, and he took a slow, deliberate step forward. "This child is a human, a symbol of the disorder we cannot allow. Our people expect strength, not sympathy." Sun clenched his jaw, but Mira spoke up, her voice as soft as ever. "I'm sorry if I'm causing trouble. I didn't mean to." Her innocence struck Fricks momentarily silent, though the disdain remained in his eyes. But to Sun's surprise, a faint flicker of discomfort crossed Fricks's face. It was a rare thing to see weakness acknowledged openly among Zix, but Mira's small, unassuming presence seemed to challenge even the most disciplined among them. "This matter will be discussed further," Fricks said, trying to regain his composure. "You are to report to the Hall of Council tomorrow morning. Both of you." His gaze lingered on Mira for a moment longer before he turned sharply, signaling his guards to follow. As they left, Sun's mind raced. The Hall of Council was where the Zix made decisions on matters of great importance, usually involving war or high-ranking disputes, not matters concerning a child refugee. The summons meant that Mira's presence here was more disruptive than he had realized. It would not be long before her situation, and his own, came under heavy scrutiny. Mira tugged lightly on his hand, her voice a soft whisper. "Are we in trouble?" Sun's gaze softened. "Not yet, Mira, not as long as I'm here." The child's trust in him stirred a resolve he hadn't felt in years. He knew the consequences of defying the Zix Council, and yet he could not abandon Mira to their judgment. She was small, lost, and in need of someone to stand by her side. And somehow, that person had become him. They returned to the inner chambers, where Mira was given a small room with an arched window overlooking the palace gardens. As she settled into the soft bedding, Sun took a seat nearby, his vigilant eyes watching over her. Mira's eyes grew heavy, and she murmured drowsily, "Thank you, Sun. You're different from the others." Her words lingered in his mind as she drifted into sleep. Different. He wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning, but he felt the weight of it regardless. Cern's thoughts swirled late into the night as he pondered the coming day. He had been a Zix warrior for years, trusted with protecting the realm and upholding its laws. Yet here he was, protecting a child from a species the Zix considered inferior. The lines between duty and empathy had blurred, and in his heart, he knew that after tomorrow, nothing would be the same. The next morning, the Hall of Council was alive with tense energy as the highest-ranking Zix officials gathered to address the unexpected disturbance of a human child within their most sacred walls. Cern walked down the grand corridor toward the hall, Mira trailing beside him, her small hand gripping his fingers tightly. Her innocent trust only strengthened his resolve. As they entered the towering hall, the air grew thick with disapproval. Rows of elite Zix council members, clad in dark robes adorned with symbols of power, sat in an arc around the central platform where Cern and Mira stood. At the head of the council sat King Zurak, his stern gaze assessing the scene before him. Commander Fricks stepped forward, his voice slicing through the silence. "This human," he began, gesturing to Mira with a thinly veiled contempt, "was found wandering unmonitored in the palace, a breach of security and a distraction from our duties. And Cern, one of our finest, was observed giving her sanctuary." The murmurings from the council grew louder, but Cern stood firm, his eyes unwavering as he faced his peers. King Zurak raised a hand, silencing the council. "Cern, we expected unwavering commitment from you. Explain yourself. Why did you, a warrior of Zixgen, defy our protocols for a human child?" Cern took a deep breath, his voice steady. "Because, my king, she is alone, without protection, and I could not turn her away." His words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. "We are strong, yes, but if we cannot protect those weaker than ourselves, what does our strength mean?" The council members exchanged shocked glances, unaccustomed to hearing such open challenges to their principles. Some looked away, visibly uncomfortable with the implications of Cern's words, but others, including Fricks, narrowed their eyes in anger. Just as King Zurak prepared to respond, a deep rumble shook the hall, sending dust cascading from the high beams above. The council members froze, their expressions shifting from annoyance to alarm. Another tremor followed, stronger this time, accompanied by the distant sound of blaring sirens. A young guard burst through the doors, out of breath. "My king, the Karnak warriors have breached the outer perimeter. They demand an immediate audience." The words fell like stones into a well of silence. The Karnak, vicious and merciless in battle, had never before dared approach Zixten soil without declaring war. Their sudden appearance could only mean one thing: they wanted something important. Zurak's face remained stoic, though his eyes flashed with a hint of concern. "Prepare the throne room." "I will hear them," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for dissent. As the council members dispersed, Cern turned to Mira, his protective instinct flaring. He couldn't leave her alone, especially with the threat of the Karnak so close. "Stay with me," he murmured to her, tightening his grip on her hand. She nodded, her wide eyes filled with both fear and trust. In the throne room, the council took their positions, flanking the walls as Zurak ascended his throne, his posture regal and unmoving. Cern stood to one side, with Mira partially shielded behind him. Every Zix eye was trained on the doorway as the Karnak envoy entered. The Karnak envoy was a towering, menacing figure clad in dark, jagged armor. His mask was crafted from a metal so dark it seemed to absorb light, rendering his features completely hidden. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, each step echoing ominously through the hall. His voice, deep and metallic, filled the room as he addressed the king. "We are not here for battle," King Zurak, the envoy, began. "We come to negotiate a truce." Zurak's eyes narrowed. "A truce? You have attacked our borders, raided our settlements, and now you expect diplomacy." The envoy's head tilted slightly, his unreadable gaze sweeping over the assembly. "We seek not to waste resources in a war neither of us can win outright. However, we require something of sentimental value to you. His gaze settled briefly on Cern and then on Mira, who was partially hidden behind Cern's towering frame. The implication was clear, and Cern's stomach turned. He stepped forward protectively, his voice firm. She is not a bargaining chip. The Karnak envoy's tone dripped with sarcasm. And yet here she is, in the midst of your most sacred hall. Perhaps you value this human more than you care to admit. Zurek glanced from the envoy to Mira, his face an unreadable mask. Why would you demand a child? He asked, his voice a dangerous calm. The envoy's posture relaxed, as if savoring the power he held in that moment. This child is human, a symbol of chaos and vulnerability, a reminder that strength must be cultivated, not given freely. We will take her as a sign of your commitment to peace. Or, he added with a cold smile behind the mask, we will unleash our forces upon Sixgen. A wave of murmurs rippled through the council. They were torn between loyalty to their king and the ingrained belief that humans, weak and chaotic as they were, could bring ruin. But Cern's grip on Mira's hand only tightened. Stepping forward, he addressed the king directly. If we yield this child, we betray the very strength we claim to uphold. We cannot sacrifice the innocent in exchange for security. It makes us no different from those who threaten us. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed Zurek's face. But before he could respond, Mira did something that shocked everyone. She stepped out from behind Cern, facing the envoy with a quiet courage. Please leave my friends alone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with defiance. Take me if you want. I don't want to cause any more trouble. The room fell silent. The envoy's laugh, dark and mocking, echoed through the hall. Look at this, Zixten, a mere child willing to sacrifice herself. Perhaps she has more strength than any of you. Zurek's gaze softened, and he raised a hand, silencing both Cern and the envoy. Enough, Mira, you will stay with us. Turning his attention to the envoy, he continued, his voice steady and unyielding. We will not exchange lives, no matter the cost. If it is war you bring, then know that we will face it. The envoy's shoulders tensed. With a final, dangerous glance, he turned and departed, his silence a promise of impending violence. As the doors closed behind him, the tension in the throne room remained thick. Zurek turned to Cern, his gaze firm. Prepare for defense, and keep the child safe. Cern nodded, his resolve stronger than ever. He knelt down to Mira's level, meeting her brave gaze. You were willing to give yourself up for us. Mira nodded, a small tear glistening on her cheek. I didn't want to be the reason anyone got hurt. Cern's chest tightened. In that single moment, this small human child had shown a strength that defied everything his people believed about humanity. And he, a guardian of Sixgen, would protect her, not as a soldier but as a friend. The hallways of the palace were in a frenzy, filled with the steady drum of armored Zix soldiers preparing for an impending assault. Cern guided Mira through the chaos, his hand never leaving hers, shielding her from the panic around them. He knew the Karnak's intentions were not to negotiate but to provoke, to test Zixten's strength and determination. And in the middle of this brewing storm stood a small human child who had defied all expectations. They arrived at the outer watchpost, a towering structure overlooking the defensive perimeter of the palace. Cern's gaze swept over the city, his face set with grim determination. The Karnak had already begun to gather on the outskirts of Sixten, their dark ships hovering menacingly on the horizon, casting shadows that stretched over the gleaming spires. Mira, sensing his tension, tugged on his hand. Will we be okay? Cern knelt down beside her, his voice firm yet gentle. As long as I am here, no harm will come to you. You've shown me a courage I didn't know existed. We'll face this together. A sudden voice interrupted them, sharp and unyielding. Cern. Commander Fricks approached, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. This human child has already brought chaos to Sixgen. Now we stand on the brink of war because of her presence, and still you choose to protect her. San met Frix's gaze, unflinching. "I protect her because it is what's right, Commander. Strength does not lie in abandoning the innocent to save ourselves." Frix's face twisted in contempt. "You are a fool. Sentiment will lead you to ruin, San." But before San could respond, a distant roar echoed across the sky. They turned in unison, watching as the first of the Karnak warships descended from above, sleek and deadly, cutting through the sky like blades. The air filled with tension as Sixin's defenses roared to life, their own warships rising to meet the threat. San's heart pounded, his focus narrowing to the task at hand, protecting Mira at all costs. "Mira," he said, his tone urgent, "stay close to me. Do not let go of my hand." She nodded, her small fingers gripping his tightly. Together, they moved toward the front lines, where Zix's soldiers were already taking their positions, weapons aimed at the encroaching Karnak forces. The palace's massive shield generators hummed to life, forming a translucent dome around the structure, a shimmering barrier between them and the incoming threat. As they reached the front, a massive explosion rocked the ground, sending a shockwave through the palace walls. Karnak troops poured from their ships, armored in dark, jagged suits that glowed with crimson energy. They moved with ruthless precision, advancing steadily despite the barrage of fire from the Six defenses. San's hand tightened on his weapon, his gaze fierce as he positioned Mira behind a protective column. "Stay here, Mira. Don't move." But just as he turned to face the approaching Karnak, a voice echoed through the air, amplified and cold. It was the Karnak envoy, his distorted tone reverberating across the battlefield. "Sixton, you had the chance to secure peace. Instead, you choose to resist. Very well, let this be a lesson." The Karnak forces surged forward, unleashing a storm of energy blasts that shattered the shield's barrier. Zix's soldiers fell back, their lines wavering under the assault. San stood his ground, his blade gleaming as he engaged the first of the Karnak warriors, his movements swift and lethal. His training took over, each strike precise, each defensive move calculated. But amid the chaos, his focus remained on Mira, who watched him with wide, fearful eyes from her hiding spot. Suddenly, a group of Karnak soldiers broke through the defenses, heading straight for the palace entrance. San's eyes widened as he realized their path would bring them dangerously close to Mira. Without hesitation, he disengaged from his fight and sprinted toward her, his heart pounding. One of the Karnak soldiers raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Mira's hiding place. Time seemed to slow as San threw himself in front of her, his blade intercepting the incoming blast. The force of the impact knocked him back, pain radiating through his body, but he refused to falter. Mira gasped, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Son." He managed a pained smile, pushing himself to his feet. "I'm fine, Mira. Just stay behind me." The battle raged around them, the air thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of clashing weapons. Zix's soldiers fought valiantly, holding the line against the relentless Karnak advance. But it was clear the battle was turning against them. The Karnak were too many, their technology ruthless and efficient. Then, out of the corner of his eye, San saw something remarkable. Mira, her face set with determination, stepped out from behind the column, raising her arms toward the Karnak soldiers. Her voice, though small, carried over the din of battle. "Stop, please, stop this." Her plea was unexpected, and for a brief moment, the Karnak soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowering as they looked at the small child standing before them. The hesitation was brief, but it was enough. The Zix soldiers rallied, seizing the opportunity to push forward, their spirits renewed by the bravery of the small human girl. Seeing the effect she had, San took a step forward, his voice ringing out with authority. "See this child. She represents something you cannot crush, something stronger than all your weapons, hope. If you truly seek peace, lay down your arms and listen." The Karnak envoy, who had been observing the battle from a distance, narrowed his eyes, his expression unreadable behind his dark mask. He raised a hand, signaling his troops to halt. The battlefield grew eerily quiet as Zix and Karnak alike lowered their weapons, uncertain but watching intently. The envoy stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Mira. "You, child, why do you risk yourself for a people who are not your own?" Mira met his gaze with a courage that belied her age. Because I don't want anyone else to be hurt. My home is gone. I don't want to see another place destroyed." Her words struck a chord, reverberating across the silent field. The envoy seemed to consider her, his posture shifting slightly. He turned to King Zurak, who had emerged from the palace, watching the exchange with guarded interest. "Very well, King Zurak," the envoy said slowly, his voice filled with a strange respect. "We will withdraw for now. But know this, the strength you show in sparing the weak will be tested, and we will be watching." With a final pointed glance at Mira, the Karnak soldiers retreated, their ships lifting into the sky, leaving the battered but unbroken defenders of Zixjan behind. As the last of the Karnak ships disappeared into the clouds, the Zix soldiers broke into murmurs of relief and disbelief. Cern knelt beside Mira, his hand resting on her shoulder, pride and admiration in his eyes. "You did it, Mira," he said, his voice soft with emotion. "Your courage saved us all." She smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I didn't want anyone to be hurt." King Zurak approached them, his gaze lingering on Mira with newfound respect. "You have shown us a different kind of strength today," he said, addressing both Mira and Cern. "One that we would do well to remember." Cern nodded, the weight of his duty somehow lighter now. The battle may have ended, but he knew that Mira's influence had left an indelible mark on their people, a reminder that true strength lay not only in might, but in compassion. In the days following the battle, the Zix palace remained on high alert, but the tension had eased. The sudden retreat of the Karnak left many questions, and whispers of the strange peace brokered by a human child spread through Zixjan. Mira's bravery became a story shared among the soldiers and servants alike, each retelling growing with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Cern, now regarded with new respect, continued to watch over Mira, whose presence had shifted from unwelcome outsider to symbol of resilience. Her gentle demeanor had won over even some of the council members, but their trust was guarded, reluctant to let go of their suspicions. Still, a profound change had taken root in the minds of many Zix, including their king. On the evening of the third day, King Zurak summoned Mira and Cern to his private chamber, a vast, circular room with walls carved from shimmering crystal. As they entered, Zurak greeted them with a nod, his face unreadable, but his gaze lingering on Mira. "Mira," he began, his voice measured, "you possess a courage and compassion that we have not seen in Zixjan for many generations. Your influence, however unintended, has shifted the course of our future. The Karnak may have withdrawn, but their intentions are far from peaceful." Mira, standing by Cern's side, looked up at the king with a steady gaze. "I don't want any more fighting. I just want to be safe, like everyone else." Zurak considered her words, his expression softening. "Your desire for peace is noble, child. But peace is not easily won, especially with those like the Karnak. However," he paused, glancing at Cern, "perhaps an alliance with Earth's survivors could help strengthen us. If there are others like you, those who seek harmony over conflict, we might learn from each other." Cern's surprise was evident, and he took a step forward. An alliance with humanity. The idea was revolutionary. Zixjan had always stood alone, never considering cooperation with outsiders. But Cern understood the king's wisdom. The recent battle had shown them that unity, even with a fragile race like humanity, could hold strength beyond what they'd ever imagined. Zurak nodded. "Yes, Cern. Humanity, despite its vulnerabilities, possesses a strength that we have neglected in our pursuit of order and power. We cannot ignore what we witnessed here. It would be foolish not to seek a way forward together." He turned back to Mira, his gaze now gentle. "Mira, if you agree, I would send word to locate more of your people, to offer them refuge here. In return, we would ask for your guidance in understanding this compassion that humanity cherishes. Mira's face lit up, a spark of hope breaking through her sullen expression. She nodded enthusiastically. Yes, please. There are so many who need a safe place. I want them to know there's somewhere to go, where they won't have to be afraid. A ripple of warmth spread through the room, and even Cern felt his chest swell with a strange pride. He knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. You've changed us, Mira. I didn't think it possible, but you've shown me, and all of Sixten, that strength comes in many forms. Just then, a sharp knock at the chamber door interrupted them. One of the king's advisors entered, her face grave. My king, has been a sighting. The Karnak envoy has returned. Zurek's expression hardened, but he remained calm. Let them in. Moments later, the same dark figure, the Karnak envoy, entered the chamber, his shattered form imposing as ever. This time, however, his stance was not one of aggression but of subdued respect. He surveyed the room, his gaze settling on Mira with a hint of curiosity. King Zurek, he began, his tone a little less hostile, I come with a proposal. I have witnessed something remarkable among you. A strength I did not anticipate. Zurek tilted his head, curiosity evident. And what is it you propose, envoy? The Karnak envoy's gaze shifted to Mira, his expression unreadable behind his dark mask. Your human child, she represents something neither of our civilizations has understood fully. I propose a test, a collaboration, if you will. The tension in the room was palpable as he continued. Our people, the Karnak, have long viewed compassion as a flaw, a weakness. But seeing how it emboldened your soldiers, I am willing to reconsider our views. Allow us to place a contingent here to study and understand this aspect of humanity. In return, we will share our tactical advancements and form a temporary alliance with Sixten. Cern clenched his jaw, wary of the offer. And what would stop you from turning on us the moment you understand our ways? The envoy's eyes narrowed. Our code of honor, Cern. If we enter this agreement, the Karnak will abide by it. However, if we are betrayed, our retaliation will be swift. Mira stepped forward, surprising everyone with her boldness. If we help each other, there won't be a reason to fight. We can be stronger together. The Karnak envoy's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, and he inclined his head slightly. Perhaps you are right, child. Perhaps there is strength in the things we have ignored. King Zurak looked from Mira to the envoy, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Then we accept with conditions. Your contingent will be closely monitored, and any betrayal will be met with equal force. But if peace is possible, we will honor this alliance. The envoy nodded, agreed. With a final nod to Mira, he turned and exited the chamber, his steps echoing down the crystal hallway. As the door closed, a palpable sense of relief and disbelief filled the room. The unthinkable had occurred, an alliance between Sixten and the Karnak, facilitated by a human child's compassion. King Zurak turned to Cern and Mira, his expression one of quiet pride. Mira, Cern, you'd have both changed our future. This alliance may be fragile, but it is a start, a step towards something greater than any of us could have imagined. Mira beamed, and Cern placed a hand on her shoulder, his heart swelling with a pride he hadn't felt in years. He had once thought compassion was weakness. Now, he understood it was the very thing that held the power to unite worlds. The days following the fragile alliance with the Karnak brought a mix of tension and hope to Sixten. For the first time in centuries, the people of Zix found themselves coexisting with those they once considered sworn enemies. Karnak soldiers, imposing in their dark armor, walked alongside Zix guards, their rigid postures softened by the cautious curiosity of unfamiliar peace. Cern continued to watch over Mira, their bond now an unspoken understanding of the strength they had found in each other. Mira had become a symbol, a reminder of the compassion that had altered the course of their lives. She spent her days observing the bustling palace, Learning about Zix's customs and sharing stories of Earth with Cern, she found herself offering smiles to Karnak's soldiers, her warmth slowly chipping away at their icy resolve. One evening, as the golden light of Sixtin's twin moons bathed the palace gardens, Mira and Cern sat beside the crystal fountain, watching the shimmering waters. Cern, who had always worn his guard's armor like a second skin, was now relaxed, the hard edges of his warrior spirit softened by the presence of the young human who had changed everything. "Do you think they'll ever stop hating us?" Mira asked quietly, her gaze distant. Cern thought for a moment, his voice gentle. "Hate is a heavy thing, Mira. It takes time to unlearn. But if one child's courage can create a truce, imagine what more kindness can do." Mira smiled, comforted by his words, her small hand reaching for his. They sat in peaceful silence, content in the understanding they had come to share. Just then, King Zurek approached, his robes flowing elegantly in the cool night breeze. He gestured for Cern and Mira to follow him, leading them to the grand hall where a gathering was already underway. Members of the council, Karnak envoys, and Zix soldiers filled the room, their faces marked by curiosity and uncertainty. Zurek's voice rang out over the assembly, steady and commanding. "Today marks a new era for Sixtin. We stand united not only with our own, but with those we once deemed enemies. This alliance is fragile, yes, but it is a testament to what courage and compassion can achieve." The room was silent, every eye on the king as he continued. "The strength of Zixtin has always been in its discipline, its adherence to honor. But true honor is found in valuing life, in seeing worth where others see weakness." He looked at Mira, his gaze softened with respect. "This young human, Mira, has shown us the depth of resilience that compassion can bring. We owe her our gratitude for the peace we have today." A murmur of agreement swept through the hall, and Mira felt her cheeks warm, unused to such attention. But there was no mockery in their eyes, only admiration, a quiet respect for the human child who had shifted the tides of their society. Zurek turned to the Karnak envoy, who had been observing with his usual stoic expression, though something unspoken glimmered in his eyes. "As a sign of our commitment, we offer you the hospitality of our palace and the protection of our people. Let this be the first step toward a shared future." The envoy bowed, his voice carrying a new note of humility. "We accept, King Zurek. Perhaps in time, this alliance will allow both our peoples to grow." With that, the formalities concluded, and the assembly dispersed, conversations sparking among the groups as Zix and Karnak alike mingled in cautious camaraderie. Cern led Mira back toward her chamber, a sense of fulfillment warming his heart. They had not only averted a war, but also reshaped the very fabric of their worlds. As they reached Mira's room, she turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think we'll find more people from Earth? Will they be welcome here?" Cern knelt to her level, his gaze steady. "If they are anything like you, Mira, they will be more than welcome. You've shown Sixtin that strength and kindness can exist together. Your people, like mine, have much to offer." Mira smiled, hugging him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his armored shoulders. "Thank you, Cern, for everything." He patted her head gently, his voice filled with pride. "No, Mira, thank you. You've reminded us all of something we had forgotten." In the days that followed, Zixtin gradually opened its borders, offering sanctuary to human refugees from the devastated Earth. Each new arrival brought stories of loss and resilience, tales of a species that had endured despite the odds. The Zix found themselves learning from their guests, their rigid culture softened by the compassion and tenacity of humanity. The Karnak, too, began to shift. They studied the ways of humanity, intrigued by the strength found in vulnerability. It was a slow process, but one that grew with each act of kindness shared, each story exchanged. Mira became known across Sixtin as the Child of Peace, her influence reaching far beyond the palace walls. She lived among the Zix, bridging the divide between species, a symbol of what could be achieved when strength was tempered with compassion. And Cern, once a hardened guardian bound by duty, found a new purpose beyond the battlefield. He became not only Mira's protector, but also an ambassador for unity, carrying forth the lessons they had learned together. Years passed, and Zixgen transformed. A thriving city where Zix, humans, and even Karnak lived in tentative harmony, building a society that valued both strength and kindness. Cern often found himself by Mira's side, watching as she grew, her influence a quiet yet powerful force. In the end, Mira's courage had done more than save lives. It had reshaped the destiny of Zixgen, a legacy woven not with weapons, but with the unbreakable threads of compassion. And though Cern had once believed his strength lay only in battle, he now understood that the greatest battles were those fought with open hearts. The story of Mira and Cern, of the peace they had forged in a world of conflict, became legend, a testament to the strength that can be found in even the smallest of hearts.